Greenleaf and the Black Blade, a serialized adventure podcast by Andrew Israelsen. Before beginning episode 7, we start with a brief recap of the story up to this point. Johannes Bruckner, a Cormorantian swordsman, awoke in a strange prison cell after making port at the Savaran coastal city of Amenia. Also in the prison was a half-elf maiden named Nima Greenleaf, who had been arrested after a failed bid at doing a good deed for an acolyte of the suffering god Isdurna. The two conversed, finding common cause. They were freed by a mysterious rogue, then discovered by the giant military man Toril, lieutenant to General Alexander of Bastos. They learned that all of Amenia and much of the surrounding region has been thrown into turmoil by the insane recent actions of Amenia's king, Hector Janison. Dark rumors of demonic influence upon the monarch have been spreading for weeks. The two erstwhile prisoners gratefully accepted Alexander's offer of scouting work, heading north to Mount Ellisbor to investigate rumors of orcs massing on the mountain's southern slope. En route, the two tangled with a group of gnolls and a pack of vicious wolves. They met the gnome wizard Tadalak Wishmere, who saved them from the wolf attack, subsequently joining the group in their adventure. After an information-seeking venture into the small criminal town of Thorn, in which they heard tell of King Janison heading north in the company of a succubus and other unsavory characters, the group observed a strange group of people, including a woman with facial tattoos, and heard mutters of a place called Velth. The group then rode north, discovering a large contingent of orcs guarding a cave at Ellisbor's base. With much daring, the group slipped past the rowdy and battling crew of orcs and entered the caverns after sending Canary back with word to the general. Inside the Undermountain, the heroes encountered a trio of trolls who they set loose upon the orc encampment, discovering a dead body with a cryptic journal along the way, as well as a strange hovering sphere. They encountered an gnome named Mordecai who gave them gifts in exchange for their assistance escaping from the place, which was now rife with devils. All of his people, he sadly explained, had been killed. The group found King Janison and the succubus at last, saving the king after a pitched battle in the depths under Ellisbor. The succubus was slain by the mysterious tattooed woman who appeared suddenly, warned the heroes off of their present course of action, and then disappeared. Toril found the three after the battle, and the group made their way south to Eltulik, one of Savar's largest, most violent, and strangest cities. We pick up now with Episode 7, at the Field of Blood. After warning the trio against wandering into the wrong parts of the city, Toril departed, leaving the three alone in the strange new polis.
Let's get ourselves set up at the inn, and then take a look around the city. We could have a look at the job board if you want, or visit some shops.
Following Bruckner's lead, the adventurers headed for the inn. The innkeep, a kind, matronly human woman who smiled warmly at each member of the group in turn, gave them a discount after they mentioned Toril's name. A large teenage boy, her son, judging from their conversation, helped the group with their travel bags and saw to their horses. The rooms were quite nice, each had a small fireplace and a deep purple hand-woven bedspread. The inn itself was a curious structure, somewhat tall and thin, like a tower shield stuck into the ground. It was tastefully decorated, with fresh flowers and water in each room, a rack in Bruckner's room for his weapon and armor, and a small desk in Tadalak's that he could work at to prepare spells. Nima's room had an elegant ivory tub, and the woman indicated that she would have one of her girls bring up hot water at any time. Bruckner and Tadalak, she also mentioned cheerfully, were welcome to use the men's bathhouse and sauna on the ground floor.
Tadalak would like to go eating, then shopping. You should be able to sell those bangles at Lyle's Emporium, little sister.
Tadalak explained that Lyle's Emporium was the largest and best shop in town. It had been in Eltulik for over 100 years and was owned and run by three elvish sisters, the Lyles.
They have all the best wares, Tadalak declared. Plus, the Lyles sisters are all famous beauties. Maybe Ox can find a bride.
The group washed up before heading out to eat, with the exception of Mordecai, who had obtained a room at the inn as well, and opted to stay in for the night in the root cellar, which the matron had kindly offered him when she saw that he didn't like the look of any of the above-ground rooms. Tadalak indicated that he wanted to eat at the Drunken Dragon, the best tavern in town, according to him. As the group left the inn, Tadalak said to his companions in Tevianite, presumably so as to avoid eavesdroppers overhearing,
Eltulik is a very strange and dangerous place. You should have no trouble fitting in here, Ox. The Elts prize and revere physical might over everything. Fighters and warriors of all kinds are praised and sought after. Magic users like me, though, he shrugged, we're less popular.
Turning to Nima, he said,
I bet you can pick up some useful information here, though, little sister. All sorts of strange folks gather here, from the doorway walkers to slavers to people who are obsessed with Sazerkand, the evil dragon that rules these parts. Not all folks are bad, though. That lady who rented us those rooms was so nice. It's an okay place, I guess, with lots of bad elements and some dangerous people in high places. I can't risk using magic here. It would give me away, so you two must protect me, okay?
The streets they strode down, paved with sandstone cobbles, were full of strange sights. Exotic weapon shops boasted curved swords and spiked chains ending in vicious morning stars. Half-nude women gestured alluringly from brothel doorways, calling out to Bruckner to come and taste their wares. At a central square, a large fountain was built around a giant skull. Gilded with gold leaf, a victory token, the plaque before it announced, taken from Sazerkan's raid of the Askarops, the mountain haunt of the Vindrian giants, some 3 centuries earlier. 2 large men were frog-marching a bound and bloodied prisoner who shouted grotesque obscenities, until one of the guards slammed a gauntleted fist against his jaw. Teeth clattered to the cobblestones amid a shower of blood, and the man went silent, his feet now dragging bloody trails through the dusty street.
Who are the doorway walkers?
Nima tried to ask, but they had arrived at the Drunken Dragon, and the question was lost in the commotion. The heroes arrived at the tavern, a large 2-story building from which were wafting excellent smells. The scent of garlic sizzling in hot oil, salted pork, and rich, peaty whiskey mixed with heavy clouds of tobacco smoke. The noise inside was deafening. It seemed to be filled with a huge party of carousing dwarves and plenty of burly humans and other humanoid species, drinking, eating, and yelling. Behind the bar stood a large dwarf, who must have been quite muscled in his day, but had now largely gone to fat. A thick scar ran horizontally across his forehead, and his white beard was tied into 3 braided knots. He was in a heated argument with a patron, from the sound of it over the best way to drop a giant.
Tadalak, you know what's best here, but I would really fancy that whiskey I smell and some good roasted meat.
Tadalak has been here twice, and both times the food was excellent. The first time I got a steak pie with bourbon gravy. Why, it was as big as me. I spent 4 hours eating until I'd finished every bite. The second time I had lamb chops with mint and rosemary and red potatoes swimming in cream and black pepper. Let's get 2 of both of those things, and a broiled fish stuffed with goat cheese, and a platter of fried bread and salt pork, and a bottle of whiskey. Oh, and a cask of ale. Oh, we can get whatever we want. Toro gave us all this gold and told us to have a good time. Anything else you 2 want to try?
That all sounds good, but I will forego the beer. Just a glass or 2 of whiskey. I want to stay clear-headed for whatever may come.
Nima nodded her vague assent, too busy dreaming of a steak pie as big as Tadalak with bourbon gravy to do more. The gnome looked dubious about Bruckner's judgment regarding the beer, but in his excitement finally just giggled and said, "Oh well, more for Tadalak," and skipped to the bar. Nima began to attempt to listen in for anything interesting being said, but heard nothing but a bunch of fighting men talking about fighting, food, and women. Tadalak returned after a moment and pulled out 3 pipes, offering them around and lighting his own. He kicked back and put his feet on the table. "This is the life, right, you 2? He asked, puffing out a thick smoke ring. "Nothing like a good meal and a stay in town after an adventure like ours." "An adventure, eh?" a gruff voice called out. It was the dwarf barkeep, with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and 3 small glasses in the other. A smaller dwarf was at his side, carrying a cask of ale with 4 mugs. They set down the various drinks and glasses, and the dwarf said, "Welcome to my establishment. The name's Bagor Hammerhand. Now what's this about an adventure, eh? Nothing I love more than a good adventure story." He turned to the small dwarf, who was still standing there listening, and snapped, "Go mind the bar, lad." The dwarf hopped to it while Bagor settled himself down and tapped a mug of ale, then looked at the 3 adventurers intently.
One time, the 3 of us snuck by an armored host of orcs, and then, finding ourselves face to face with their pet trolls, we turned the creatures loose on their masters. But that's small beer for such as yourself. Tell us of your own adventures.
Small beer nothing?" Bagor replied, clearly impressed. "That's damn impressive, that is. How'd you keep the brutes from turning on you, eh?" "As for me, I've seen a few fights, sure. Went up and down the Viscal coast way out west when I was a younger dwarf. Helped take down a lich and his pet zombie dragon outside Indola once. Phew, that was a fight, no mistake. Then I took up gladiatorial fighting in the arena, see? Made a bit of a name for myself in the gladiatorial rings there in Indola. Then eventually traveled east, participating in a fighting caravan. Settled down here. Why, it'd be 30 years ago now and started up the tavern. You know." He gave Bruckner a good once-over, up and down. "You look like you can handle yourself, lad. And if you can take on trolls, then no doubt you'd fare well in the ring. What do you say? We have a little arena here in El Tulik. Fastest way to fame and fortune is through the field of blood. I'd be happy to sponsor you, you know, and if you ain't afraid of a little pain, there's no real danger. Clerics are very staffed and on hand to heal up the combatants after a fight, or even raise them up should one die. Whether they do or not depends on how you acquit yourself in the fight, lad, but like I said, you look like you can handle yourself. What do you say? There's good money in it.
I would be interested to test myself in the fighter's hall, though it would have to be soon. We're needed elsewhere tomorrow.
At this point, the food was brought out, plate after plate of it, steaming hot and delicious. Tadalak took a break from his mug of ale to dive into one of the huge steak pies. Well, it's too late for a fight today, lad, though I like your eagerness. If your business permits tomorrow, come by and we'll get you set up for a match. He heaved himself up and laughed to see the gusto with which Tadalak was eating and drinking. Glad to see you're enjoying the food and beer. He patted the cask of ale and said, I'll have him send out another one on the house. It was right fine to meet you folk.
Another time, then.
He nodded to Tadalak and Bruckner and bowed deeply to Nima. He then headed back for the bar, leaving the three to their meal. After several hours of eating and relaxing, the group finally finished up, stuffed to bursting. Bruckner and Nima nearly had to pull Tadalak away from the table. He had filled his hands and pockets with the last of the salted pork, and on the way out, scooped up the remaining goat cheese into a piece of fried bread, munching it down as they left. Oh, good food, huh? He asked cheerily, stumbling a bit as they walked out. Their walk through the city was enjoyable, though it was clear that this was a land that forced one to stay on their toes. The feel of the place was somewhat exotic, with dangerous-looking men milling about and sultry-eyed women sitting at custom in high windows. The group passed a rather brutal-looking brawl. A large man was going toe-to-toe with a giant half-orc, and apparently winning. A crowd was gathered about, placing bets, cussing, and cheering. After a few minutes, the three entered the commercial district proper, which was the bazaar they had passed through earlier on the eastern side of town. They made their way past the various peddlers to the huge central structure, the only permanent shop in the area, the Emporium. There were two main doors, one on the north and south sides of the shop. As they entered, they noticed to their surprise that both doors were guarded by gigantic bugbears, unsavory creatures wearing half-plate, holding huge studded maces. Their eyes traveled the room coolly, with none of the ferocious rage one would expect from such virile creatures. Presumably they were under some sort of mind control. The place was full of patrons, some looking at various magical items, others trying on clothing or armor, yet more handling weapons at the far end of the shop. An area was set apart in one corner where an aged wizard sat, apparently enchanting items for a fee. Nearly anything a person could want could be found here. After a moment, the three noticed a central figure who was quite obviously running the show. A tall, graceful, blonde-haired female elf with aquiline features and striking blue eyes, she was describing the various virtues of a set of enchanted gauntlets to a stout dwarf maiden packing a ferocious-looking war axe. Then, spotting the trio, made her way over to them. Welcome to Lyle's Emporium, she said. I am Laithlin Lyle, the chief proprietress, along with my sisters Solarin and Torin. What are you looking for this fine evening? After a look at her companions, Nima decided that she was probably the group's best bet at bargaining for a good price on their wares. She stepped forward and showed the elf the bangles they had acquired. Laithlin looked over the bangles very carefully, spending several minutes poring over the details. She looked up finally with a bright smile. These are a very fine make. I can gladly give you 3,000 gold pieces for each one. Bruckner then produced his composite longbow. Laithlin took the bow and again looked it up and down, even going so far as to string it, with apparent ease, and test the flex. A well-made bow, she said. I will give you 200 gold pieces for it. After their business was completed, Tadalak said, What say we go for something sweet on our way back to the inn? There's a little shop here on the south edge of the commercial district that blends cream and ice with strawberries or chocolate or caramel into a sticky frozen treat. They call it ice cream, and it is to die for. He looked at them, expectant and hopeful.
Yes, it sounds interesting. What did you call it? Iced cream?
Shortly thereafter, they arrived at the shop Tadalak had mentioned. It was run by a gnome family. Outside was a small awning striped red and white, and inside was an array of whirling machinery, producing a thick, creamy white substance coming out of a nozzle in the middle of the mechanical array. A bucket caught it, then, while they looked on, a gnome promptly scooped out a bowlful, mixing it with fresh strawberries and handing it off to a bright-eyed half-elf child, who nearly jumped for excitement upon receiving it. The three each ordered a bowl of the strange substance and dug in, much to their mutual delight. Afterwards, they headed back to the inn for a well-deserved night's rest.